The sky over the border burned in tones of copper and dust, as if the gods had forgotten to wash the firmament. The distant mountains, now almost shadows, divided two worlds, Mexico and the United States, by an invisible line no one dared cross anymore. It was late 1886. The war had ended on paper, but the land still bled. Eli Turner rode slowly, hat low to keep from swallowing sand. The horse limped, and the rifle on his back hung from a worn leather strap. His old campaign vest drooped loosely over a sweat-stained shirt, and his sun-darkened face bore a fresh scar across the jaw, thin as a knife's edge. He was a man returning, though no one knew from where. Maybe not even he did. The adobe homes in the valley were abandoned, doors ajar, roofs collapsed, fire marks blackening the walls. Crows perched on broken crosses. A toppled cart lay under a charred tree. The Yaqui village, or what was left of it, looked like a half-buried memory. It had been burned weeks ago, when a Texan patrol mistook spiritual markings for signs of rebellion. They said all had died, all but one. Eli dismounted near what remained of the town center. The air still smelled of scorched earth. The silence was thick like clay. He stepped through the rubble carefully, as if walking over bones. A beaded cloth hung from a stake with dried flowers inside. He didn't touch it. As he turned to leave, he saw her. Small black eyes like river stones. Hidden in the brush, skin streaked with ash, bare feet planted in the dirt, long hair matted to her forehead. She stood still, unblinking, not crying, just watching, as if she had known he would come. Eli crouched slowly, said nothing. Neither did she. They stayed like that for seconds too long to measure. He reached out a hand. She didn't flinch, just stood and walked toward him, steps silent. When she was close enough, she gripped the fabric of his coat, not begging, not pleading, just holding on, like someone trying not to disappear. The trail to the nearest town was narrow, lined with brittle cacti and twisted shrubs. Eli rode slowly, the girl behind the saddle, his left arm securing her small frame. The sun was sinking, tinting the sky with rust. At the town's edge, dogs barked, and women pulled their children indoors. The chapel bells rang once, faintly, more a warning than a greeting. Father Ramiro came forward, clutching a crucifix with unease. "Who is this child?" he asked, eyes fixed on her. "She's from the hills, from the burnt lands." Eli nodded. No need to say more. "She cannot stay here. She brings misfortune. She's the daughter of the Yaqui sorcerer." Men began to gather. One in a faded uniform tapped the side of a cart. "That girl, she's wild. Better take her to the fort. They know what to do with leftovers." Eli said nothing, just looked around. No one offered water, or bread, or shelter. Only wary eyes and prayers that tasted of fear. Without a word, he turned his horse and rode back the way he came. Behind him, murmurs turned to whispers, and whispers turned to threats. Night fell without ceremony. The moon, thin as a blade, peeked through low clouds. Eli's cabin sat against a dry hillside where the wind never stopped blowing. A shell of weathered wood and uneven stones with a sagging barn nearby. No comfort, no beauty, only the essentials for someone who had long stopped asking for more. Inside, the girl sat by the cold stove. She didn't ask for food or bed, just sat, watching. Eli handed her a rough wool blanket. She took it, but even wrapped in it, she didn't close her eyes. The night crawled by. Outside, the wind scratched the windows. Inside, the only sound was her breathing. Slow, awake. When the fire lit the next morning, she was still in the same place. Eli, nearby, drank coffee from a tin mug, glanced at her sideways, unsure what to do. She seemed part of the house now, like the mold on the walls or the dust on old books. Silent, still, but present. In the weeks that followed, Eli tried to teach her names. He pointed at objects. Cup, door, water. She didn't repeat, just watched, absorbing. She did everything he asked, carried wood, swept the floor, helped with the horse. Never complained, never smiled. He called her Luma, after the light that filtered through the roof when she walked. Faint, but unwavering. One day, he found her outside, drawing circles in the dirt around a dead beetle. Small, precise motions. as if the circles meant something. He didn't ask why, just watched. At night, she sat in front of the door after the lamp was lit, like she was waiting for someone, or keeping the world from entering. No one came up the hill. But the rumors trickled down to the valley like snakes in the sand. They said Eli had lost his mind, that the girl was a spirit, a forest-born curse. Someone left a bone-carved crucifix wedged between thorns on the trail. Another, a note with jagged words. "She will take you too." Eli burned the notes without a word. But that night, for the first time in years, he locked the door. While Luma slept on the floor wrapped in the blanket, he stayed up late with the rifle by the chair, eyes fixed on the dark. The next morning, she left a bundle of dried flowers on the table. 3 stems, tied with a strip of leather. Neither of them spoke. But for the first time, Eli thought, maybe the world he knew was changing, and maybe that beginning wouldn't come through war but through silence. The land around the cabin cracked underfoot like old porcelain. Dry weeds clung to the dust, and the scent of ash still hovered in the air, weeks after the last rains had failed to arrive. Below the ridge, the Rio Bravo crawled like a silver scar through the desert, silent and slow. Eli had spent the morning patching holes in the roof with slabs of bark. Luma helped without needing to be told. She passed the nails, held the ladder, steadied the frame. She moved with precision. No wasted steps, no wandering eyes, as if the work itself kept her tethered to something deeper than survival. Inside the cabin, she had started arranging objects. A stone here, a dried fruit pit there, little altars of balance and symmetry. Eli didn't disturb them. He didn't ask what they meant. He just stepped around them as one would a grave. One afternoon, while gutting a rabbit out back, Eli looked up to find her staring at the smoke from the fire. Her face unreadable. She walked toward the smoke and, without a word, reached into the flames with a flat stone, pulling something half-burned from the edge. A carved stick, blackened, but intact. Eli said nothing. She held it for a moment, then buried it under a small mound of earth near the fence. That night she sat longer than usual by the doorway, fingers wrapped around a strip of cloth that seemed older than her own hands. Eli, seated behind her, cleaned the barrel of his rifle, and watched the moonlight settle on her shoulders like dust. In the village below, the rumors had soured. The name Luma was never spoken aloud, but everyone knew what it meant. At the cantina they muttered, "Witch child, forest devil." His mind's gone. Women clutched rosaries tighter when her name slipped from whispered lips. One morning, a skinned rabbit was left hanging from a mesquite tree on the trail to Eli's cabin. Its eyes missing, its throat tied with twine. He burned it without blinking. Later that week, he found crosses carved into his doorframe, small ones, etched with knives. Symbols meant to ward off demons. Luma said nothing when she saw them. She simply took her old cloth, the same she always carried, and wiped the marks clean until the wood showed bare again. Eli watched, arms crossed. She didn't look at him, but when she finished, she placed the cloth back into her pocket like something sacred. Days passed, dry and brittle as corn husks. The wind picked up, bringing with it the scent of distant fires, fields being cleared too early, the heat pressing into every crack. Then, without warning, Luma began to hum. It was faint, only in the early morning, while lighting the fire or fetching water from the old tin barrel near the barn. A tune with no language, no rhythm, just a low vibration, like the wind remembering a voice it once loved. Eli heard it but never asked. He simply listened from the other room, letting it echo through the boards. That same week, he found her outside, crouched by the edge of the yard, tracing symbols into the dirt with a twig. Not letters, not numbers, shapes, spirals, curves, lines crossed at angles. When he approached, she quickly smoothed them away. He didn't stop her. She didn't explain. Something unspoken passed between them. It was on a Sunday afternoon that the priest came. Father Ramiro, dressed in black, with a thin wooden cross resting against his chest, climbed the trail to Eli's cabin with 2 younger men behind him. They didn't carry Bibles. They carried axes and suspicion. Eli stepped out onto the porch, rifle resting on one shoulder, not pointed. "Yet. She doesn't belong here," the priest said. She's disturbing the peace of the people. There are fears. She's just a child, Eli replied, voice low. A child who survived when no one else did. A child whose presence brings no rain. A child who builds circles from bones. Silence. She hasn't spoken to any of us, the priest continued. That alone is cause for worry. You know the stories. I know fear, Eli said. And I know the smell of a burning village better than most. The priest narrowed his eyes. Then you also know what happens when one man's mercy brings ruin on a whole town. The younger men shifted their weight, but didn't move forward. They sensed the air between Eli and the priest, heavy with old war and unburied shame. Eventually, the priest turned. We'll pray for you, Mr. Turner, but not forever. They left without further words. Eli didn't lower the rifle until their footsteps disappeared down the ridge. That night, Luma didn't sit by the door. She lay curled on the floor, her fingers pressed tightly around the old cloth, her breathing shallow. Eli sat nearby, watching the fire fade. Outside, the wind changed direction. It now came from the east, hot and restless. He didn't sleep. The next morning, they found footprints near the barn. Adult boots, deep, fresh. Someone had come up the trail in the night and left. Eli stood over the prints for a long time, then turned to Luma. She looked at them too. Then, quietly, went inside and began packing things into a canvas bag. Dried food, strips of cloth, a small jar of water. Eli said nothing, but he began tying the saddle tighter on the horse. Not because they were running, but because something had changed. They would need to be ready. The rains came at last, not in thunder or flood, but in a slow, steady drizzle that turned the dust into clay and the clay into memory. The air smelled of wet bark and buried things. The cabin leaked in 5 places, and the wind crept in through the cracks like a whisper that had waited too long. For the first time since she arrived, Luma spoke. It was early morning. Eli had just poured hot water into a chipped mug, steam rising like a ghost. Luma stood by the window, watching the rain smear the glass with slow fingers. She didn't turn to him. Her voice was almost lost in the hush. My father, buried, near the fig tree. Nothing more, no explanation, no tears. Eli didn't answer right away. He simply set down the mug and grabbed a rusted shovel from the back wall. Luma followed him, barefoot, through the soft mud, her steps quiet and sure. They walked down the hill, past the broken fence, toward a field overgrown with thorn brush. There, bent sideways from years of wind, stood a lone fig tree, gnarled roots, scarred bark, but still alive. Luma dropped to her knees and began to dig with her hands, slow and deliberate. Eli joined her. The soil was stubborn, wet and tangled with roots. After nearly an hour, they uncovered something wrapped in cloth, weathered but carefully tied. Inside, bones, small, brittle, and with them a necklace made of copper and stone beads strung on a faded strip of hide. Luma didn't cry. She just held the necklace in both hands, pressed it to her forehead, and then set it back into the earth. She closed the cloth carefully, buried it again, and placed 3 flat stones over the spot in a triangle. Eli watched without speaking. He understood now that her silence wasn't emptiness, it was discipline, like a priest with no temple, like a soldier after the last war. They walked back in silence, the rain softening to a mist. That evening, Luma arranged 3 chairs on the porch, 2 large, 1 small, and then sat alone on the steps, watching the sky change colors. Eli brought out a blanket and draped it over her shoulders. She didn't thank him. She didn't need to. Inside, he stared at the fire, thoughts tangled in the rhythm of the flames. He had seen death, more than he ever counted, but never had he seen someone carry grief so gently, as if it were not a wound, but a companion. A few days later, a rider appeared on the trail, a stranger, thin, weather-worn, horse tired and foaming. He didn't stop at the cabin, just passed slowly, eyes scanning the yard, then continued down the path. That night, the dog Eli had begun to feed barked toward the hills and didn't stop until dawn. They weren't alone anymore. The next morning, Luma was drawing again. This time not in dirt, but on a scrap of cloth she had stitched from old rags. Lines crossed lines. Arcs. Symbols. Eli asked finally, "What are those?" She paused. "My mother taught me," she said softly, "to remember things." "What things?" Luma looked down at the cloth. Her fingers traced a spiral. "Where we came from. What we lost." She didn't elaborate. Eli didn't push. Instead, he retrieved a box from under the bed, one he hadn't opened in years. Inside, medals, a revolver with a cracked handle, letters from a woman long gone, a child's drawing of a horse. He handed her the drawing. "This was my son's." Luma took it gently, as if it were still warm from a small hand, then folded it once and placed it near her own cloth on the table. Two memories, side by side. Later that day, a man from the village came up the trail, drunk and loud. He shouted Eli's name from the base of the hill, cursed the girl, threw a dead bird near the fence. Eli didn't go down. He stood at the porch with his rifle resting in his arms. Didn't raise it, didn't blink. Eventually, the man left, stumbling over his own hate. Luma swept the porch that night longer than usual, each stroke of the broom careful, ritualistic, like clearing space for something unseen. As the days shortened and the air cooled, Eli started locking the cabin at night, not from fear, but from inevitability, the kind that settles in your bones before it ever knocks at your door. One evening, Luma sat by the fire with the copper necklace from the burial site in her lap. She had retrieved it days before without saying a word. "Do you miss them?" Eli asked. She nodded. He waited. She looked at the flames and said, "I don't think they're far." Eli considered that. "I think you're right." And for a moment, the room didn't feel so hollow. The next morning they found another warning, a string of feathers and bone tied to the fence post, a knife stuck into the dirt, a message carved into wood. "You will bring this on yourself." Eli untied it, placed it in the fire, and said nothing. But as the flames rose, Luma reached for his hand. He let her. By early fall, the sky had turned to bronze. Days ended faster. The wind grew colder, carrying with it the rustle of corn stalks and things left unsaid. The river ran slower now, as if holding its breath. Eli spent more time on the porch, cleaning the rifle without urgency, watching the trail. The old dog no longer barked. It just lay by the door, ears twitching at the sound of boots in the distance. Luma had taken to sleeping near the hearth, even when it wasn't lit. Her drawings became fewer, her words rarer. She had begun to pull inward, like a seed under hard earth. Then, one Sunday morning, the silence broke. They came on horseback. 4 riders, 2 in military uniforms, stiff and sharp, 1 in plain brown robes. The 4th, tall, unsmiling, bore no markings, just a long coat and eyes like frozen river stones. They didn't knock. Eli stepped out to meet them, rifle not raised, but resting in his arms like an old truth. Father Ramiro was among them. He dismounted with practiced calm and approached the porch slowly. "She is still here," he said quietly. Eli nodded. "You've been warned, Eli. She's not a danger. She's a shadow." Eli stared. "She's a child," he replied, voice like grit. The tall man in the long coat stepped forward now. "Captain Levitt," he said, not offering a hand. "Border enforcement. We've been sent to resolve what the church has failed to contain." "Contain," Eli echoed, like a bitter taste on the tongue. Father Ramiro folded his hands. "The people are restless. The rains are late. The harvest's weak. They want someone to blame. You know how it begins." "I do," Eli said. "It begins when we hand over the innocent to keep the guilty calm." Levitt's mouth barely moved. "This is not a trial, Turner. It's a removal." Behind him the 2 soldiers shifted in their saddles, eyes scanning the house. Luma stood in the doorway now, just behind Eli, her feet bare, her hair tied back. She said nothing. Levitt's eyes flicked toward her. "She needs to come with us, tonight." Eli stepped once to the side, shielding her. "She stays," he said. Father Ramiro looked pained. "Don't make this harder than it needs to be." "You already have," Eli said. The priest sighed and nodded to Levitt. "We'll return before dark." The riders turned and left. No threats, no raised voices, just the cold certainty of decisions already made. That afternoon Eli packed dried meat, water, a tin of coffee, a coil of rope. He saddled the horse, checked the revolver, then sat at the table with Luma. "We'll leave before the moon rises," he said. She looked at him and nodded, then reached into her pocket and placed a small object on the table. A stone, flat, smoothed by time, painted with the shape of a raven in red clay. "For the path," she said. Eli closed his hand over it, said nothing. As the sun fell, they stayed quiet. In the final light, Luma lit a candle and placed it on the window ledge. Not for guidance, for memory. Eli waited at the door, rifle in hand. Then the silence broke again. A distant sound, hooves, 4, then 6, then more. Voices rose. Not angry, not fast, but determined, measured. The sound of men who believed they were right. Eli turned to Luma. She was already at the back door, bag on her shoulder. They moved into the brush behind the barn, low, silent. Then, from the front, a crash. The door kicked in. The dog barked once, then went silent. Voices inside now. Boots. The floorboards creaked. But Eli and Luma were gone, slipping through the dry ravine behind the cabin toward the base of the ridge. No stars yet. No moon. Just the fading scent of smoke and the cold rush of fear under the skin. They reached the river by nightfall. The water was dark, cold, and slow. Eli waded in first, testing for depth, then pulled Luma across behind him, holding her arm. On the other side they crouched in the reeds, breathless. Behind them, shouts rose, faint, but closer than they should have been. Eli grabbed a stick and began masking their tracks with long strokes in the mud. Luma did the same without being asked. When it was done, they didn't speak, just listened. Only the river now, only the night. They walked east for hours, following no trail. Only the rise of the land and the whisper of trees. Luma limped slightly. A blister opened on her heel, but she didn't complain. At a small clearing, they stopped. A broken fence, an old cattle post. Eli gestured for her to sleep. "I'll watch," he said. She didn't lie down, but sat against a log and pulled the raven stone from her bag, turned it in her fingers. Eli looked at her and asked, not for the first time, "Do you believe they'll stop?" She met his eyes. "No," she said, and neither did he. They slept in fragments. Eli, leaning against the trunk of a dead tree, the rifle across his lap. Luma curled in a blanket too thin for the cold, her head resting on a bundle of cloth. The night was heavy with silence. No birds, no wind, only the distant groan of the land cooling under stars. By morning the ground was stiff with frost. Eli rose first, joints aching. He brewed a weak coffee over a fire no taller than a fist, smoke vanishing quickly into the air. Luma stirred at the smell and sat up without a word. Her feet were blistered. He wrapped them in cloth, and she let him, not from comfort, but trust. They said nothing as they ate. Only the chewing of dried meat and the faint rustle of leaves marked their presence. Later, they walked again. North, then east. Across brushland that once held cattle, now empty but for brittle fences and crows circling high. Each step left prints in the frozen dirt, a path they could not erase. In the distance, a church bell rang. Too far for danger, but close enough to remind them. Someone was always listening. That night, they found shelter in the ruins of an old ranch. Only half a wall remained standing. The chimney, still intact, bore soot from another time. A bed frame rusted under what was left of a roof, and someone had carved initials into the wood. Eli gathered branches. Luma unpacked the few supplies they had left. A heel of bread, a tin of beans, her raven stone, which she now kept near her at all times. They ate in silence, knees drawn to chests, fire between them. "Do you think they burned the cabin?" she asked suddenly. Eli took a long breath. "Yes." She nodded, as if she already knew. "And the dog?" He didn't answer. They both looked into the fire. The flames bent with the wind, flickering like voices trying to speak but never quite saying the thing. Luma placed the raven stone on a flat rock beside her. It gleamed faintly in the firelight. "You can leave me," she said, not as a plea, as a fact. Eli looked at her, brow furrowed. "I won't," he said. In the morning, they spotted smoke on the horizon. A patrol, 3 riders, same uniforms, same direction. Eli led Luma down into a dry wash beneath a fallen tree. They lay there, pressed against the earth, the sound of hoofbeats echoing above them like thunder in a narrow canyon. The men didn't stop, didn't look down, but Eli knew they would return, next time with dogs, or fire, or something worse. That evening he made a decision. "We'll head for the pass, south." Luma didn't question it. They moved fast now. Nights were colder, days sharper. Her feet bled again, and he carried her for stretches at a time. She never asked, but she never refused. The land rose into hills. Less desert now, more rocks, more wind. One morning, they found the body of a deer stripped to bone. Coyotes, a warning in flesh. Luma stared at it for a long time, then placed a single stone beside the skull. Eli didn't ask why. He understood. Some things deserve to be remembered, even in pieces. At the edge of a canyon they stopped. Below the world opened, winding trails, the outline of the river, smoke curling from a distant village too small to be marked on any map. Salvation or ruin. No way to know. Eli looked at Luma. Her lips were cracked, her eyes half shut from hunger and cold. "We'll rest here," he said. She nodded, sat on a flat stone and unwrapped her cloth. Inside, the raven stone. A bit of bread, the copper necklace, and now a new object. A small drawing, Eli's son's horse sketch, folded and refolded so many times it was nearly tissue. She handed it to him. "You dropped it," she said. Eli took it, stared at the lines drawn by a child long gone. He said nothing. He simply pressed the paper to his chest, then folded it again, and placed it back in her hands. "You keep it." That night, the wind turned violent, cold, cutting. They huddled beneath a rock shelf, blankets drawn to the chin. In the darkness, Luma whispered, "Why do they hate me?" Eli didn't answer right away. He let the question breathe. Then, softly, "They don't know what to do with what they fear." She nodded, and he added, "You're not the one who should be ashamed." Silence followed, but it wasn't empty. It was steady, like the silence of stone. Before dawn, Eli woke to the sound of hooves again. Distant, too distant to see, too close to ignore. He shook Luma gently. "It's time. No more time for waiting. No more sheltering in ruins. No more hiding. Only one thing left now. To cross." They reached the river just before sunrise. It moved slow, thick with silt and shadow. Fog clung to the surface like breath held too long. The banks were steep here, the water deep, not the kind a child could cross alone. Eli studied it carefully. He had crossed this part once, years ago, with a uniform on his back and blood on his hands. Now, he carried something else entirely. Luma stood beside him, silent, her arms wrapped tight around her chest. The raven stone hung from her neck by a string she'd braided from threads of her old cloth. Behind them, the wind shifted. Voices, faint, echoing, rose from the trail. "They're close," she said. Eli nodded. He turned to the horse, tightened the straps, tied their small pack behind the saddle. He wrapped a blanket around Luma's shoulders, then lifted her up into the saddle and climbed behind her. The river was wider than it looked, and colder. They entered slowly. The horse stepped with caution, hooves slipping once on the moss-covered rocks. Water rose past Eli's boots, then his thighs. Luma clung to the front of the saddle, eyes forward, mouth pressed shut. Halfway across, the current pulled hard. The horse bucked. Eli gripped the reins, braced his legs, and held her tight. "Don't let go," he murmured. She didn't. The far bank came into view, but the current turned fierce, churning with debris and branches. A log rushed past, striking the horse's side. It stumbled. Luma cried out, not from fear, but surprise. They were going under. Eli grabbed her, threw her forward. "Swim!" She kicked, reached for a rock, caught it. Eli didn't surface right away. The current dragged him down, twisting around his body like a rope pulled by unseen hands. But then, air. He broke through, gasping, the sky blinding with morning light. Luma had crawled onto the bank. She reached for him with both hands, eyes wide, face wet with river and fear. He grasped the edge, pulled himself up, collapsed beside her. They lay there, wet, shaking, breathless, but alive. By noon, they had built a small fire from driftwood. Their clothes steamed. The horse had been swept downstream, lost to the river's will. Eli sat with his back to a tree, one hand over his ribs. Luma placed the Ravenstone beside him, then sat down, knees drawn to her chest. "They'll come," she said. "Maybe," Eli answered. "But not yet." She nodded. He looked at her. "You saved me." She didn't reply, just leaned into his side, resting her head against his shoulder. And for a long time, neither of them moved. That night, the stars returned. No clouds, no smoke, no voices. Only the soft chorus of crickets and the hush of water running slow. Luma took the copper necklace from her pack and placed it on a flat stone beside the fire. Then, from inside her shirt, she pulled out the horse drawing, now wrinkled, but whole. She unfolded it carefully, placed it beside the necklace, and whispered something in a language Eli didn't know. He didn't ask. He simply watched. When she finished, she looked at him. "Will it be different now?" Eli thought for a moment. "Maybe not," he said, "but we will." In the morning, the light was soft and gold. Eli rose first, stretched his sore limbs, the pain in his side still sharp, a bruise or a crack, but he didn't mention it. Luma was already awake, packing what remained. The river behind them ran quiet now, like it had never taken anything. They followed a deer trail into the brush, south, toward no town in particular, toward nothing written on a map, just forward. After a while, Luma turned and asked, "What if they find us?" Eli didn't stop walking. "Then we keep moving." She paused. "And if we can't?" He looked at her. "Then we stand." They walked in silence after that. No fear, no panic, just steps, steady, certain. They came to a hill. At the top, the land opened like a wound healing. Tall grass, wildflowers, distant smoke that might have meant food or danger, or both. Eli stopped, turned back. The river below shimmered in the light. He looked at Luma. She was holding the Ravenstone in her hand again. "Leave it," he said gently. "It's done." She looked down at it, then nodded. She walked to the edge of the hill and set the stone on the ground. Not buried, not hidden, just placed, then turned and walked forward.